There is an observable difference in the communication patterns of ADHD people.
We go from like, oh my gosh, do I have ADHD, to like, there's a world in the future where you couldn't even hide it. They did, however, note that ADHD participants exhibited tangential speech patterns, which is completely untrue and has never happened in my life before.
Excessive speech and unrelated topics. Nope, never heard of her.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Research Recap. It is so wonderful to be here with Sarah today. We've got two very, very cool papers that we're going to be talking about. And we're going to just dive right in. The first paper we're going to be looking at today is about pragmatic skills with ADHD, aka nonverbal communication, conversation, taking turns in conversation. And if that makes you feel a little bit called out, you are not alone, and we're going to be talking about it right now. So, are you ready, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm totally ready. You know, I'm just also going to say that I had no idea what pragmatic skills were. That's never something that really came across in my early learning, specifically, although obviously there are ways that we influence early communication skills in our children.
Yeah, definitely. I've never come across the term, but I have lived the anxiety. So I think that
that is so good. Yes.
So basically what this study did, so this study is from Language and Health. It's a feasibility study, which means they're kind of looking at if this is even worth doing more thoroughly in the future. And they're looking at basically a novel assessment tool for evaluating pragmatic skills. And so that's that conversational ability, that facial skills ability, all that kind of stuff within the ADHD population in an aim to improve treatment plans. So actually think about hey, that interrupting thing, that's a pragmatic skill. Let's talk about that. But also as a diagnostic tool for potentially assessing for ADHD as well. So feasibility studies are fun because you can kind of be like, we're going to see what this does and then essentially do that.
Yeah. And wow. Okay. So I was a little bit confused when I was first reading through this paper because I was like, wait, we're talking about this, but now we're talking about this and how do those relate? And so they really just took us through a whole thing. But basically, I've got a summary for y'all. First, they took an assessment made for neurotypicals and they transformed it to be for ADHD. So this assessment tool looks at things such as discourse and non-literal meaning. That's understanding idioms and colloquial phrases, just figures of speech, so to speak.
I understand colloquial phrases. How dare you?
That was just so interesting. I have no idea why they did that, but yeah, really cool. I think they go on to say because it was easy.
And so their expectation is that people with ADHD are going to be worse at these things. Was that what they're sort of saying?
Yeah. So they separated it into two separate categories, which we sort of define and look at more later. But we've got pragmatic production and pragmatic comprehension. So on one side, the production is can you do this? And then the comprehension bit is, can you understand when other people are doing this?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So who did they get? Pretty small sample size. We've got 31 in the ADHD group and we've got 88 in the control group. In order to make it into the control group, you had to have no history of any kind of diagnosis. And all of the ADHD people were validated with a proper diagnosis. No statistical difference between the samples, with the exception of the ADHD group. There was actually 21 males and 10 females. So that's significant.
Yeah, that's a big difference. So it looks like, from what we're looking at here, that this study was 35 to 45 minutes long, and it was really focusing on those verbal pragmatic abilities in social communication.
Yeah, there were a couple of different sections of this test. The first one took approximately 10 minutes. That was the interview and the description. So the interview is sort of meant to assess your conversational abilities. How socio-normative were your abilities? It's sort of like pass, fail, partial kind of scoring, which I think is, leaves little room for ambiguity, I guess.
Yeah.
And then the second part of that was like a description task. So they'd show you 10 photographs and then the participant would have to describe it. And they were looking for like specific targets. Like, do they name the key elements in these photographs? And again, it was sort of like a scoring, like, yes, they got it, or no, they totally didn't get it.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So they had a whole bunch of things. They had the narratives task, the language task, the humor task, as you said. Gosh, that's interesting. I'm so curious.
Yeah, we didn't even get into the second portion. This is actually the longer portion of the test where they start evaluating like your understanding of another person's social cues. And the way they evaluated that was, do you understand when somebody speaks to you?
Yep.
Do you understand those things like idioms and metaphors, figures of speech, again, the humor, like, do you know when someone's joking? And honestly, I feel like we're talking more about autism again.
That's what I thought was so interesting. Like, this is such a relatable but not discussed factor of ADHD, because the fact that they were just like, we're going to do this for ADHD. I'm like, cool. Like, but why though? Like, I didn't realize we were having this conversation. I mean, I know we've had this conversation, but I didn't realize academically this conversation was being had about ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, really, the paper sort of talks about in its introduction that pragmatic skills are just inherent to a successful life. I mean, they do cite a lot of different papers here in various different domains, but I guess the tie-in is that ADHD people are struggling enough. I don't...
Yeah, they're like, we've noticed that they are struggling with humor and colloquial phrases, and we feel like maybe...
Yeah, it says there's nothing to, like, diagnose pragmatic deficits in ADHD.
That's so curious. Gosh, it's one of the things I love about research. Sometimes people will just be like, yeah, I wanted to, and that is why we are doing this paper. And then we'll read it and be like, this is so good. I'm really happy someone's doing this paper. It doesn't always have to come from like this very, very big place, although often it does.
Most major ideas start small anyway.
Yeah. Feasibility study. I told you, they're interesting, those feasibility studies. So don't keep us in suspense. I'm so curious. What did they find?
So much. In my notes section, I just wrote results section is a lot. They did find some stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, namely, empirical support for this as an evaluation tool. They didn't really develop like a whole treatment suggestion or anything, but yeah, they were like, yeah, this definitely is promising. It needs to be replicated again and again and again. But there is an observable difference in the communication patterns, I think, of at least these ADHD people.
It's so fascinating because it feels like such a win to hear or to read somebody saying that in academic things. Because in real life, I'm like, yes, obviously. At least to me, who spends all my life talking to neurodiverse people and communicating with neurodiverse people about communicating with neurodiverse people. So the fact that somebody is talking about it in this way, I think is so good. I'm really, really happy to have this paper. I was really happy to see it.
Yeah, I think that this paper is really cool, and there's so much actually in here. I believe this one was open access for anybody interested. I will obviously link it, as I always do, references. But one of the things that's really, really cool is sort of a tie-in here to, like, why we don't tend to study this. So it pretty much just says that, like, these results are consistent with past studies that have shown things like struggling with this non-literal language and sort of inappropriate initiations. And I honestly, maybe I should have read those studies too. No, but it suggests that perhaps this is like partly a working memory issue. You know, we hear the thing and we don't remember.
Yeah, like names. That can be a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I have to come up with memory techniques to remember people's names that I don't see regularly.
Sorry, people. I'll know everything about you except your name. I'll know like where you went to school, what your life goals are. Like the name part is the tricky one.
I've been seeing my eye doctor for like 4 years. So like, I love you. I just...
If you're listening right now, this is your moment to know.
Actually, I told her.
What did she say?
She just sort of laughed. I'm not sure that she understood.
You can just tell her next time. You're like, no. It's a pragmatic skill and I struggle with it. This paper will explain everything.
Before we segue into the next paper, before we started recording, I asked Sky if she sort of understood why we were talking about both of these papers together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm also going to connect the dots for everybody. Basically, this next paper that we're going to be talking about is sort of like written by engineers. Mm-hmm. And it's another one of those models that were developed very similarly for like diagnostic purposes. And it also looks at audio and text. Again, communication patterns. And I just think that's so cool that both of these papers exist like at the same time. That means this is obviously a broader and growing field. Very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. One of those papers is trying to understand if this is something that we struggle with, and the other one's going, well, it doesn't super matter because we've got AI and we can just measure differences and we're assuming that they will be there. And that's what we're going to talk about right now is were they there and what were they? So let's jump over to that paper.
We know that ADHD can feel overwhelming and frustrating, and that's on a good day. And we don't want anyone to have to navigate that alone.
That's why we created the ADHD Academy, where adults with ADHD can meet, join, share stories, and support each other in a judgment-free way. If you want to connect with others who truly understand you and learn research-based strategies to help you feel more in control and build momentum in your life and work, you found the right place.
Together, let's transform your ADHD challenges into strengths. If you'd like to know more, you can click the link below to join us in the ADHD Academy.
Hope to see you there. So this paper is focusing on, it's called Acoustic and Text Features Analysis for Adult ADHD Screening, a data-driven approach utilizing the DIVA interview, which is not about Mariah Carey. It is actually about a diagnostic interview for adults in ADHD. And basically, as you said, Sarah, this is from an engineering paper. So shout out to our wonderful research team who pulled this out. But they were looking at will the utilization of speech and text analysis aid in the early detection and the overall screening process for ADHD, which we love because it's wonderful. The faster we can get that early detection, that early screening set up, the faster we can say, okay, maybe you should go and get that potentially difficult to get diagnosis and go through that process and hopefully provide more support for that as well. So do you want to tell us a little bit about who these people are, Sarah?
So this is another pretty small pool. We've got 22 native English speakers, 10 of whom had ADHD. Now that was a even split male-female, 12 for the control group, which was skewed male. Mm-hmm. All of the ADHD participants have NHS certified diagnoses from a specific place in the UK. They were all evaluated using the ASRS, pretty standard self-assessment tool. Yeah, and then they put them through like a battery of tasks here.
Yeah, a full battery, like literally the neuropsychological test automated battery.
I think that's probably like a database or something. I have to go look at that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, what were they looking for then? So they had the interview tasks for the DIVA. So they administered the diagnostic interview, which is a semi-structured interview based on the DSM-5, like so many of them are. And that one focused on social interaction, hobbies, self-esteem, which comes up, but it's interesting to see here, relationships and occupation. And they used a portable microphone to capture speech patterns, which I thought was super interesting. I don't know. This whole paper is just so interesting.
Yeah, because they built a lot of different like models around different aspects of the speech. So they recorded the people so that they could capture speech patterns such as like pitch, jitteriness, tone, volume.
I just realized people could literally listen to us on the podcast and do this test.
We are both native English speakers. I think we qualify.
Yeah, I think
except
we
for
do.
The diagnosis part.
I'm feeling very, like, I don't know, it just makes you feel very, like, self-conscious. You're like, right, yeah, jitteriness is probably a thing that you could probably measure. Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
Yeah, and then, like, the difference in the volume all the time. Like, I'll become, like, so self-aware out in public about that one in particular. But it's okay. The awareness is very good.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so that's basically what they were doing. They did a couple of these. They did the DIVA-based interview task, which I just discussed. They also did the Geneva Minimalist Acoustic Parameter Set, which is not something that you can buy tickets to, but it's actually a test.
Yeah, so this is the model that they created with the sound patterns, the speech patterns, I'm sorry. Because basically what they did then was take the different models based on the different types of language. So they have your speech patterns, like your vocal speech patterns, but then they also have like text patterns from that. I don't think we actually talked about that. They're calling it the ISAT, the Intelligent Sensing ADHD Trial, but it's basically just like a huge data set of audio, video, text, keyboard tracking.
Jeebus.
And then they were building models off of each of those different types of communication styles and seeing which one was more accurate based on the DIVA.
Yeah. So what did they find?
They found that the audio and the text patterns were the most accurate at about 77, 78%, respectively.
Interesting.
So that means that your speech patterns through audio or through text could reasonably predict whether or not you have ADHD.
Gosh. So what you're saying is there's no, we go from like, oh my gosh, do I have ADHD? I maybe I don't, to like, there's a world in the future where you couldn't even hide it. You would literally be out there in public speaking and somebody would analyze you and be able to tell enough to at least, recommend you for some kind of further study. They could figure out whether you had ADHD. That's kind of freaky.
Not me crying about it, though. That sounds beautiful. Like, think about, I don't know about you, but I've asked for help so many times in my life and not received it, or at least not an appropriate type. And so if it had been so easy to record me doing my like crazy entertaining that I used to do when I was a happy-go-lucky child.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're totally right.
Tears, actual tears. It's fine. I'm fine.
But no, you're right. I think you 100% hit the nail on the head. And I think a lot of people probably can imagine that experience because, I mean, I was a hyperlingual child. I had that thing of being like very, very talkative. Yes. And I think if you had put me through this data set, you would have found ding, ding, ding. Not just precocious, maybe something else as well. And I think that would have been, very, very helpful. That would have definitely reduced the amount of different degrees I did before I figured out that maybe the degree wasn't the problem. Yeah. So very exciting.
Yeah. So we should go back because specifically the semantic features of the language played a significant role in detecting that ADHD.
Basically the types of language. So, it was this idea of like when we focused on the classifications rather than the structural aspects of the language. So classification of the language. I don't know if we have a definition for exactly what they mean by that, Sarah. They were a bit vague at this point.
I couldn't find like a actual definition or even an example in the paper, which was a little bit disappointing.
Yeah.
I imagine maybe I could investigate a little bit further. All of the tables in this URL are broken.
Right. Well, we'll just have to email them and be like, hey, we put you on a podcast. Could you please fix these links?
Where's the full text?
It is funny. No. They did, however, note that ADHD participants exhibited tangential speech patterns, which is completely untrue and has never happened in my life before.
Excessive speech and unrelated topics. Nope, never heard of her.
So, that is possibly part of what they mean when they talk about those semantic features. They talk about the idea of that classification of like, is this relevant? Because if it's not, you might have ADHD.
So this is actually another reason, is because we talk a lot of smack about some of these self-assessments, like, and the specific wording, because as neurodivergents, we do tend to have these like interesting communication patterns where we focus more on like this answer in this situation, but it's a different answer in a different situation. And so I really love
choose.
like, or at least not provide like an option that fits.
Yeah.
So I love that both of these studies are kind of doing that in different ways, but very like both totally hitting the nail on the head with the non-literal language. And just marvelous.
Yeah. Definitely. There were a couple of limitations to the study. Obviously, we mentioned the small sample size. But again, these are both kind of, I would consider this one almost a feasibility study as well. And there's those kinds of studies often have a smaller sample size because before they put, heaps of funding behind it, they want to see if it even works with a small group. So that was kind of one of them. And they also said that maybe a broader approach of assessments could provide a better overall picture of ADHD, which is true. But I think they're being too hard on themselves. I'm going to be honest. I think that this is a really cool approach. It's very, very cool.
Yeah. I mean, could they have done a super comprehensive like data model? Yeah, sure.
Couldn't we all?
Yeah. Would it have been published this year? No, they're still building it in that world. But I mean, of course, the sample was very low in both papers. But again, like they're just going to keep doing it. They have to. Yeah. Cat's out of the bag. Does anybody know that one? What does that mean? Seriously, does anybody know?
Yeah, I don't, but I'm knowing that I've looked up those kinds of things before, and I can tell you right now, it's probably very sad. Most of those things have some very old, very sad storyline about like, I don't even want to say it on this podcast, but yeah, if I can imagine what it might have to do with, but I'll let everyone look that one up in their own time. Sarah is looking it up right now. This is her.
I can't wait, but they don't know.
Well, I know like ring around the rosy and things like that. Like all those little idioms, they often have to do with, like disease or something that happened in the past. Anyway, that's a tangent, which as we've pointed out, we've never heard of. So we're going to get back to the focus, which is these studies. Very, very cool. Very, very interesting. I highly recommend, if you have a chance to have a look at them, do so. And, really what it's speaking to is the possibility of what we've talked about before and we've had people on to talk about, which is that, these big data models might be able to help see who has ADHD in a way that is much simpler and much faster. And, language use and how we approach talking about things and engaging with people and how we speak could provide a little bit of a clue to our ADHD itself, which is really exciting.
It's also really comforting, I think, because so many of us might feel like a stigma around how we communicate, but just knowing that there are like actually millions of people out there who communicate just like you.
Who are not listening to us because they're looking up.
Yeah, exactly. They're still looking at the
at the cat out of the bag.
But now they're on like different cats thing. Like, yeah.
If that is you, we see you.
Yeah. So it just really bringing the community together here, I think. Yeah. And I was really excited to talk about these.
Yeah, I was going to say, Thanks so much for finding
context.
these.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, interrupting. That's like part of the thing as well.
That's okay. And you know what? I told Adam we were going to stop doing that. And
I'm sorry, Adam. Adam's our wonderful and long-suffering editor who edits these together. And you guys think it's so perfect, but yeah. At least we can give him the research for why this happens.
Yeah. Oh, he's gonna be so happy.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for finding these papers. These are very, very cool and a really fun, like, I think quite a positive conversation about what could be a very negative thing, which is that we talk differently, but it could be cool.
Super cool.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out or connect with us, you can leave us a message at admin@unconventionalorganization.com.
You can also find out more about our ADHD coaching organization, read our free articles, or sign up to our online courses at unconventionalorganization.com. That's organization with a Z or an S. They both will get you there.
If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed here today, or you want to read the transcript, you can find that at our show notes page at unconventionalorganization.com.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and think someone else might find the strategies and stories helpful, the best thing you can do is share episodes using the share button in the podcast player, or leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or your podcast player of choice, letting them know why you've benefited from this podcast.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back in the ADHD lab next week.